Okay, good morning to those joining us live, and good afternoon or evening to those who are watching this recorded later on. Welcome to the ADAA webinar, Managing Your Holiday Stress. We have some amazing presenters here today. We'll be taking questions at any time, so please be sure to submit them in the Q&A. We also welcome you to scan the QR code that you see here on your screen to support ADAA's efforts to provide free mental health education to the public with wonderful webinars such as this. I would like to just quickly introduce our presenters before we get the show on the road. We have some amazing presenters. I'd like to welcome Dr. Karen Cassidy, who is an ADAA past president, whose interests are in anxiety disorders in children and teens, social anxiety disorder, treatment refractory OCD, and working with children and teens who suffer from both developmental concerns and anxiety disorders. Her research focuses on information processing in post-traumatic stress disorder and CBT treatment for anxiety in children, teens, and adults. We also have Dr. Crystal Lewis here with us today, who is a current board member of ADAA. Dr. Lewis is a licensed clinical psychologist with a section on developmental and affective neurosciences at the National Institute of Mental Health. Welcome. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Tanita Franks, who has a pursuit of passion for helping people who have problematic social anxiety with the creation of Bashful and Bright, where she aims to make evidence-based treatment strategies for social anxiety more widely available through her YouTube videos, group therapy sessions, and an online program. Thank you, all three of you, to joining me today to talk about holiday stress. I'm going to stop my share so everyone can see us nice and easily. And to just start framing this conversation, I'd love to just hop right in. The holidays can be considered a time of joy, but it also results in stress for many. I wanted to quickly start off by framing some of the terms. So what is stress and what are stressors?
Well, I'll start out. One misunderstanding that many people have is that stress is a bad thing. And from the point of view of scientists and mental health professionals, stress is anything that requires you to adapt. And so stressors can be negative, they can be positive, or they can be both, like having a newborn baby where you're so happy to have them there, but you're so tired. And one of the things that I want to mention that's really important, and you can see a TED talk on this by Kelly McGonigal, is that your attitude about stress is actually more important than whether or not you're stressed. And what she found in her research is that if you believe that stress is negative and dangerous for you, then you're way more likely to suffer the ill effects, as opposed to if you view stress as an opportunity to cope or to learn something or to, step up to a challenge. And so that's one thing I want to make, a point of that is that today when we're talking, we're going to be talking not just about what are the negative or difficult things, but what's going on in your mind about what's happening and how you view it and how you can transform that into something helpful.
Yeah, I think that's great. And to add to that, it's important to be aware of our perceptions or our cognitions, the way we think, right, about these things, just like you're saying, Karen, in terms of framing it as, is this stressor something that's positive or negative? It can be both, right? And so it's really how we're responding in these situations. And then I'll also add, it is very important to distinguish between stress, anxiety, and other symptoms of mental health disorders, right? And so what exactly is stress and how are we responding to it? So I think a basic definition, right, is stress can be a physical or a mental response to an external cause, such as having a lot of projects to finish up towards the end of this year, right? For the holidays, having a lot on your to-do list. It could be experiencing an illness, having difficulty in paying bills. So part of this is the actual situation, but then it can also just be, right, our perception about it. a stressor can be a person, a situation. It's how we're framing it. And so it's important to just be aware of these different things, and then how our body is responding, how cognitively we're responding. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. But I would say differentiating the stress from the actual symptoms of anxiety or depression, sadness, and pinpointing what that looks like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those answers. And I love that Crystal was pointing out that you can, something positive, you can feel both positively and negatively about a specific stressor. We're here to talk about the holidays, and Sasha, you're probably going to guide us in that direction, but certainly for many of us, the holidays can both be a time for potential joy and togetherness, and a source of stress, which I know we'll be getting into. But I think, yes, just knowing that it's a really broad category, a broad term when we think about stress, and it can be complex to think about the nuances and just how it can be very individual and positive and negative, short-term stressors, long-term stressors. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, you're right. My next question, as I lead into it, is so what do these stressors look or even feel like during the holiday season?
Ooh, I think they can be quite varied. I will just start with what I think can be one primary stressor for a lot of us, myself included. It can just be our expectations of what the holidays are supposed to look like, right? Like we get a lot of cultural messages and images about what the perfect holiday season is. Expensive gifts, getting together with family, snuggling up in matching pajamas, everyone's getting along, the music is great, the food is great. And certainly the holidays can be very positive for people, but we add a lot of stress when we sort of buy into those images, I think, without analyzing it and without really thinking about what would a positive experience of the holidays look like for me? Like, what is my reality? How do I want to define a good or positive holiday season? So being able to just be aware of buying into how other people define it, and really sort of taking some time to think through your own preferences and your own situation, I think can be one way to sort of confront potential holiday stressors.
I love what you said, Tynessa, because the most frequent mistake I see people making is expecting people that they've had trouble with all year or don't like getting together with to all of a sudden rise to the occasion and be something they're not, or they expect themselves to all of a sudden become comfortable dealing with a relative who is pretty critical and always mentions how much weight you've gained or how much you need to lose, or ask you those awkward questions about, well, when are you going to have kids? Or when are you going to get married? You've been living with that person for so long. And I tell people, the first thing you need to do is to look at how does everybody act, and then assume actually that's what's going to happen, and build your holiday around that instead of what you wish could happen. And another thing I see people do is spending too much time together. So I'll give you a good example. I love my parents, but if I spent 2 weeks straight with them in their house, I know that I would become the kind of human being I don't like, and I would treat them in a way that they wouldn't like, because I know my dad can't help but give me directions. And I know my mom can't help but complain about certain things that I don't want her to complain about. And so I realized short and sweet is way better than too much. And so you need to also ask yourself, how much time can I actually spend with these people before I get irritable? That's how long you should be spending with them, and not do because my parents or my aunties or my uncles want me to stay in their house or spend all this time, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And to add to that, the unique part of this year, I guess, or this time of year, are those expectations of family get together, friends getting together, a lot more activities. And knowing that you have the choice to say, okay, this is what I'm going to partake in, and I'm not going to engage in this. And if it is more related to family get-togethers, limiting the time, as Karen mentioned, that you are going to spend, right? So realistically, you may have to, not have to, but you may decide I'm going to go visit certain people or spend more time with my family, but knowing how you're going to do that. So having a plan for how much engagement you would want with those individuals. And I think also for a lot of people, the messaging is out there. This is a time for families and spending time with people that you love. There are some people who don't have those communities. And so it's a lot more awareness. That stressor becomes, you know, you're more aware of being alone and feeling like you don't have the opportunities to engage socially in the way that you would want. And so I think on both ends, just being aware of what this time of year, the emotions that arise during this time of year, those can be stressors. Again, when we're talking about the positives and negatives and what we can do about it.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm so glad you mentioned that issue of, you know, what if I'm in a situation where I'm alone?
Mhm.
And it can be alone because I'm living in an area where I just can't get back to people I would like to be with, or I don't have a relationship with family or they're dead, or you know, just circumstances. And, you know, one thing that I think I want to remind everyone is one of the most wonderful things you can do socially is to invite someone to do something with you and to be the one that risks planning. And so one of the things I found that's very powerful for the people I work with is, even if you're really socially anxious, is daring to try to ask other people to either invite you to their home or their gathering, or to create your own. And to be the person who is proactive if you're realizing I want to spend time with people during this time, that would make me feel better. And we know that, you know, a large chunk of the population feels a little hesitant about asking, could I join your family, or could I join you friends, you know, do a friends giving type thing at Christmas or at Ramadan or Hanukkah. And we found the majority of people would love to have you involved. They'd love to be with you.
Yeah, we had an interesting kind of question that follows up. Like, what are the roles of support groups and where might people find them if they are looking to kind of develop a community and experiencing loneliness during this season?
Ooh, that's a great question for support groups. Oh man, I wish I just saw someone tweet about an organization that hosts support groups. I'm going to pass the mic to someone else and see if I can quickly find a resource that I came across the other day. You guys can go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm going to
so
see if I can
the
look
thing
this up.
I would say is that I'm hoping Tanessa can find that. But one thing that I do think really helps people is when you are willing to be vulnerable and share with other people, you know, this is my vulnerability. This is how I'm feeling. And I've had patients where they've been able to find this by just going online and searching for open groups or blog rooms. ADAA actually has one in English and one in Spanish, an anxiety and depression online support group. And when I've gone on and looked, people are incredibly supportive, and it's international. If either you can speak English or Spanish. And then you can also use the Google Translate function on the website for ADAA to translate what you're reading into your mother tongue if, you know, English or Spanish is not that. And then another thing that I found is looking, if you have any religious affiliation or are comfortable, is oftentimes there are faith communities that are looking to invite people into their homes. So for example, in my community here, we have the Great Lakes Naval Station. And what surrounding faith communities do is they'd say, we want to bring people home for Christmas, for Thanksgiving, for Ramadan, and they sign up and they bring people into their homes. And their idea is, we want to give someone an opportunity to be with a welcoming group and to join us. And, you know, and so there's some things like that that you might not think of that would be opportunities for you.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, one of the advantages I'll say now to being in such a digital world with social media is you can identify specific groups by interest, whether it's just like a professional group in your area you want to join, or maybe I've seen groups for, mothers or specific demographics that you can join, and they have all types of activities throughout the year, but also during the holidays, you look for those postings on, it might be virtual, right? You can join one of those rooms. I know there are certain apps that you can use, depends on how comfortable you feel, but it is an avenue to connect with like-minded people. And then along those same lines, there are websites like meetup.com that are all for social outings, right? And so you can scroll on there and see if there's something that you feel comfortable with joining and going out. And this could be in-person activity, obviously making sure that you're safe about your efforts to join, but there are plenty of ways that you can engage that way to try to make those connections, which is really important. And I think we'll all agree that it is important to try to, be vulnerable and take the initiative to ask people to get together or join groups and just expose yourself to the different activities that are out there.
Yeah. Another thing that I've had plenty of clients do that they found was especially meaningful was to volunteer.
Yeah.
And so, and typically in any community, there's going to be faith organizations or civic organizations that are serving meals on special holiday days or distributing gifts or singing if you like that. And I've heard some very moving stories where people said, it was the best Christmas day or the best Thanksgiving I have ever had. I've been really alienated from my family and I knew it wouldn't work. And it was amazing where I realized this world is so much bigger and loving and there's so much community out there. And so that also is another brave option because it can put you in a completely different mind space. And one thing to remind you of is that when we give our time or our money, we build our mental health. And in Japan, they actually have a type of therapy called Merida therapy, where it's focused on serving other people. And they do this as part of inpatient treatment. We don't often think of the holidays, or at least Christmas, as a getting time, like what will I get? But it's also about giving. What can I give? How can I show love to the world, to others?
I like that. That's great. I did not find that resource I was looking for. It's like a digital health startup company that focuses on support groups. So I wasn't able to find that. I was reminded though, as I was looking for that also you can check the NAMI site. So the National Alliance for Mental Illness website. They also have a feature there where you can find support groups specific to different problem areas. So that might be one additional resource.
Yeah. One thing I'm seeing a really great question here is, how to deal with if I'm having seasonal, mood problems where my depression is getting worse or my anxiety is getting worse, or having to get together with everyone creates anxiety, either because of my social anxiety or my panic disorder or my other anxiety disorder or past trauma and very difficult experiences with the people that you are expected to get.
Ooh. I'm gonna hop in while Karen's a little frozen. The people you're expecting.
Mentioned. Oh, yeah.
You're back.
Sorry. To be compassionate is something really important, which is what are your expectations? And the tough part, if you're feeling depressed or really anxious or anticipating, I'm not going to be able to rise to the level of other people's energy, or I'm scared I'm going to be preoccupied by my anxiety or my depressed thoughts, is to give yourself a break and say, people are going to want me there, whether I am at my very best or if I'm not at my best. And that it's not fair to expect yourself to be something you can't. And then the other thing I'd remind you is if you're anxious, the thing you stand to gain is it's a way to push back against your anxiety and saying, I don't want anxiety to take away something important if I want to gather or be at this party or do these things. And it's better to practice being there and discovering I can handle my anxiety, even though it lies to me and tells me I can't, I'm not enough, this is too much. And then if with your depression, we know that the more you're able to put yourself around others, the more you're able to get active and do things, the more likely you are to lift that depression. And so just staying home and nursing your depression because you're afraid you'll drag others down is a mistake. And I can say, depression and anxiety runs in my family. We have one member that really struggles with seasonal affective disorder. And what we always tell this person is, we would rather have you there sobbing and feeling suicidal so we can love on you and remind you your life is bigger and more valuable than your depression, than we would have you staying home mistakenly believing we don't want you or we think you're too much. And so that's my initial, answer to that. I know you guys have some really great ideas here too.
No, I like that too, setting expectations. Like, your goal is not to figure out how you can engage with your family or participate in the holidays without being anxious or without being depressed. It's more like seeing it as, how do I show up in spite of my anxiety or in spite of my depression? I actually saw this analogy online a few days ago where someone was saying that their therapist told them to imagine their current worries, their current problems as like a sheet of paper in front of their face. So you have all your worries right there in front of you. And what you want to try to do when you're engaging with other people during the holidays is to just lower that paper just below your face, just below your eyes for a period of time. So when you lower it, the issues and the problems are still there. They're still there with you, but you open yourself up so that your eyes can see other things. You can take in information. You can engage, even if it's not in your most ideal way. It's not about getting rid of that sheet of paper, getting rid of that worries. Just, how do I lower it a bit so that I can take in new information and maybe see things in a different way? So yeah, I think piggybacking on what you're saying, is like setting those expectations for yourself as you're navigating this season.
Yeah, I really like that analogy a lot. And I think along those lines, a lot of times we can get very overwhelmed with what to do. So you have a lot of invitation. You might have a lot of invitations during this time. You might just not feel like doing anything. And what can be helpful is setting up a bit of a schedule. So, or just saying, okay, I'm going to do this week, right? I'm going to do these 3 things. So give yourself a list of something that you feel like you can manage, put it on that list and just focus on those things, getting that done, checking it off. So that can help with the behavioral activation piece of you're going to do something, but instead of being overwhelmed with there's so much to do and I don't feel like doing anything, is just decide what you'd like to do, what's in your control, and then focus on those 3. That can help with feeling overwhelmed in terms of the anxiety piece of it, but also when you might experience those symptoms of feeling depressed and low energy and saying to yourself, there's no way I'm going to be able to handle all this or get to all these family events or activities. That is okay. So give yourself some grace and say, you know what, but I'm going to choose these 2 things and just do that. So you're starting and getting yourself out there. And then that can help to get the ball rolling and moving, and then you doing different things. So again, this kind of goes along the same lines of just managing the expectations that people aren't expecting you to show up and be in full form, right? They just want to know you're there and love on you, like Karen was saying. And so letting yourself, okay, I'm going to go to this one event. I know I'm not feeling great at all, and I'm not going to be the life of the party. That's okay. Just show up. That's it. That's all you have to do, even if it's for a limited amount of time. But it can be helpful to just, again, have a structure of, okay, this week, this is what I'm going to do. And that way it takes away from feeling like there's just so much to do and I can't get anything done. Sometimes that's a helpful strategy people use.
Yeah. And I like the idea that you mentioned that you don't have to do the whole thing. The idea is something's better than nothing. And something is a huge success if you're struggling. And you have to also give yourself kudos for the fact that you're doing something. And I think that's really important, because part of this problem with expectations is that you don't recognize how magnificent you are when you try to do something. And then another something I want to talk about that I know is a problem for everyone is what do I do about setting boundaries? Okay. What if I have the kind of people around me where they want me to do more than I can, or they're going to bring up the awkward conversations and do stuff that I know is likely to make me just be furious or annoyed or really depressed because I'm not pregnant, or I'm not with a partner, or I don't have the job I wish I had, or I still have to live at home. And here's my suggestion. Be proactive. And this is the way you can be proactive. And I'm going to give you the phrase. It's going to say, person, whoever you are, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, sister, brother, friend, partner, I would really love for you to help me enjoy these holidays and enjoy you. And you could really help me if you just don't mention and then fill in the blank, because I would like to be the kind of person that could have fun with you. And I know if you mention that, I'm not likely to be the kind of person that's fun to be around. And that is one way that you could handle this, is to, in a kind, polite way, set an expectation with them. It won't guarantee that they won't do it. And in fact, they might still do it, but it'll do something important for you. It'll give you power. It'll help you realize I can actually say something instead of being quiet and being resentful or seething. And then also, most people, even if they're obnoxious, really do want to get along. They really would like to have a positive experience. And sometimes if you just give them a little kind guidance about what the contingencies are, they are able to rise up a little bit more. And I know it doesn't feel that way sometimes, but the truth is most of us genuinely would love to have a good interaction with each other. And you need to assume that's true for the people that you feel like are really difficult. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing is to always give yourself an exit. And this is where pets, little kids, or an exercise routine come in really handy. Okay. And so you can kind of use that and say, well, I think the kids really need to go home and get a nap now, when you realize this is just too much. Everybody's had too much alcohol and it's going to be weird. Or you can say, I have to go home and walk the dog, or you bring your dog or cat with you and you have to go help them. Or you're like, I really need to work out now, and I'm going to go do that. And feel free to use those as your exit, but plan ahead so that if I get over my head, I have a predetermined way that I'm going to do that.
Yeah, I like that idea of preparing ahead of time too when it comes to setting boundaries. And the only thing that I would just maybe add is just resisting the urge to over explain when you're setting boundaries, particularly if that's something that is difficult for you. So you set a boundary, maybe you say like, I'm feeling tired, so I'm going to go. I need a little bit of time to unwind. And people are like, but no, we really want you to stay longer. And then you sort of give some more reasons. I think a lot of times coming up with your statement, like Karen's talking about, like preparing in advance, have your statement ready to go, coming up to it and just returning to that. I mean, it may feel super repetitive to just repeat that language, but I think being prepared to do that is a way to help yourself really hold the line. Sometimes when we try to explain and we, well, I really need to do this and we go into all of this, we sort of risk not holding our boundaries and then giving in to whatever other people want us to do, and then we're more likely to feel resentful. And so creating that line, holding it, and not feeling pressured to explain yourself, justify yourself, or make people understand, right? Like sometimes people just don't understand, and that's okay. Right? You don't always have to be seeking understanding. It's nice when people understand, it feels good, but sometimes mom, dad, family members may not understand and agree with what you've decided is best for you. And sometimes it's just the hard reality of it.
Yeah. I noticed someone was talking about grief here. Crystal, do you want to help handle that? About what to do if you realize the holidays are going to feel especially hard because someone you love is not present, or it's actually the anniversary time for a death.
Yeah, right. I think, yeah, the holidays can be a very difficult time in general for a variety of reasons that we touched on, but especially, it can be a time that we are missing that person who's very involved or, with our holiday festivities. And I think, you might feel a lot of grief and sadness during this time. And so how we can manage that, there are a variety of ways you can manage that, but I would say it's really important to be able to express how you're feeling to those other family members or friends and figuring out what is the best way to deal with this, right? And so do you have a small support group who can help you to process this? If it's a specific loss and you'd like to talk about that person. So it might be creating a memory book. You might want to sit and spend some time looking at family pictures. You might want to help someone reminisce, even if it's a child, in a way of making certain, memorializing that person. So you can make certain crafts and activities. I think it's important that we don't shy away from the experience of feeling sad and grieving and, oh, it's a joyous time, right? I don't want to bring this to anyone, but knowing that you're not alone in experiencing that grief, if it is a shared kind of family member or a friend. And it would be, now is a good time, right, to either utilize support groups if you feel like you're having a really hard time dealing with it. But I do think this is a common time to have those feelings arise, even if it's a loss from many years ago. It could be a loss of a relationship. So now you're experiencing this holiday very differently than you did before. And so we know loss can come in many different forms, but there are some of those strategies can be helpful.
Yeah, and there's a great author, Kate Bowler, and she has this saying that says, "A life is beautiful, life is hard." And she has some very lovely books where she's talking about this phenomena of we live in a world where there's both suffering and joy, there's grief, there's tragedy, there's sadness. And I've found that people who are grieving find what she has to say very, very meaningful and helpful. And so I point you to Kate Bowler. And then I love what Crystal was saying. One thing I've had, some families do, and this is what my family does. I have a sister who died 14 years ago, is we give gifts in her honor. And we have what we call Terry gifts. My sister's name was Terry, that we give. And then also we give to, my parents set up a fund for English majors, because that's what she was at the university where she went. So we give to that. And I found one thing that patients tell me is the hardest part is when other people won't let you talk about it or be sad about it. And Crystal was, I think, saying we've got to confront this and allow our grief to be part of our life and not be afraid of it, and realize that the sweetest thing is to be able to remember and to know that person is still part of you and part of your family, or your existence, even though they may not be physically present, and to do something that demonstrates that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hop in and kind of take us for a little turn. We had some questions on the idea of perfection during the holiday season, and the pressure we all feel to be perfect or be around family members who might seem perfect, and we become very aware of our flaws. How do we manage that expectation we put on ourselves during the season?
Well, I'll jump in. Probably it helps if we define what perfectionism is. And scientists and mental health professionals view perfectionism as an overly narrow definition of what success is, and an overemphasis on how bad mistakes are. And it's the opposite of being tolerant, flexible, and self-compassionate. And honestly, perfectionism is something you don't want. So I know in job interviews, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm a perfectionist." And I'm like, it's not something to be proud of. And people accidentally think it helps them. And so the first thought that I have to tell you is, if you have some very specific ideas about how things are supposed to go, you might want to look at that. And if your feeling is, if it's not like that, it's bad, or it's not up to standard, or you've let others down, then I'm sorry to tell you, you're dealing with some perfectionism. And you might want to look at this and say, number one, okay, how bad is it really if things don't go that way? And to think about, what do you do if you're in a gracious state of mind, if someone doesn't do things quite right? You know, if you, someone says, oh, I forgot this part of the meal at Thanksgiving, and it's not the only dessert there is, do you really go like, well, that does it, the whole holiday's ruined? Or you just kind of laugh and go, ha ha, and maybe I can find a candy bar on the way home at the Quick Trip. And so one would be to ask, you know, how bad is it really? And do I really want to base my worth on this? You know, do I have to have that Instagrammable holiday photo? Do I really have to send cards to everyone I know with an absolutely adorable picture of myself and my dog? Do I really need to lose weight for this holiday? And do my kids really have to behave extraordinarily well when they're hyped up on junk food and lack of sleep? And too bad if grandma and grandpa think they're just not the right kind of kid. I'm going to give them grace. And so that would be my first thing I'd say, is to ask yourself, how bad is it really? And do I really want to base who I am and how I feel about myself and my life on whether or not this thing goes a certain way?
I would agree with that. One small tip, as Karen was talking through that I was reminded has some research support when we're talking about how do you change thought patterns that may be problematic, is one strategy is to talk to yourself in the third person to sort of get some separation from what you're feeling. So for example, if you notice that you're feeling some pressure to we're talking about examples of perfectionism. So maybe you feel some pressure to show up with certain attire, certain clothing, to present yourself in a certain way when you're getting together with someone. You can say to yourself, like, so my name is Tanessa. So I would say to myself, like, Tanessa, I know you're feeling some anxiety around not being able to show up in a way where other people perceive you as attractive or, very well put together, or having a certain amount of money. And I understand that it's hard when you feel like you're not able to meet the standards that you set. And then the next key piece, after you sort of name what you're feeling, is to show some compassion for that. So to say, well, sort of what I was just saying, like it's difficult to be in a position where you're not meeting your own personal expectations. And then you sort of pivot and say, but you're doing the best you can. You're a good person. And the people who are at this party care about you and they want you to be there. And if they don't like what you have on, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. So something to sort of help yourself reframe what that would mean. But just that act of talking to yourself, using your own name, it sounds insignificant, but there is actually some research demonstrating that does help give you that objective view. So you're basically talking to yourself as if you're a separate person. And that helps you sort of get into that mode of being able to handle those emotions in a different way than maybe you would if you're just thinking about it in your head.
I really love that. I think in a very simple way, something I talk to my patients about is just using the phrase, done is better than perfect. And so a lot of times our perfectionism can lead into things taking a whole lot longer than they need to, right? Now you're feeling behind, you have so much you need to do. And really the goal is to get it done, right? Get these things off your list so you can really enjoy the whole, like we're talking about the holiday season, but the process of going through and doing things. Just reminding yourself, done is better than perfect. When you have the negative thoughts that come in and tell yourself, you're not doing enough, this is not good enough. It's just, you know what, I have to get this done. Done is better than perfect. It's fine. And so I think having that reminder, or even going back to the self-love of I am enough, right? It's not about what I'm wearing or what I'm bringing, or the food that, the food my family wants. It's just like, this is enough. So having these very short, simple statements can be helpful to disrupt that process of having a lot of negative thoughts that you might engage with during the stressful times. So sometimes that can be just a very quick strategy to have what resonates with you. It could be done is better than perfect, but having a very short statement that you're gonna kind of lean on when you find yourself going down that path of having the negative thoughts.
Yeah, and one thing I'd want to throw out there to all of you is, number one, you are enough. You may not know it yet, but one thing that Tanessa and Kristen and I see all the time is amazing human beings who come in not believing they're enough, and then they start taking risk and they discover, I have so much more than I ever thought. And it's because they dared to try and dared to do it the messy way, the messed up, not quite perfect way. And then the other thing I want to tell you is about a study. And this was done with the National Press Club, which is like all the best journalists in the world, the kind that go to the White House. And they have the best speakers in the world that earn 6 figures for speaking coming to them. And over the year, they were testing the hypothesis, are there some people who are really more polished than the rest of us? And that's why they do so well. And they had half of the speakers, a random half, deliberately make mistakes in their speeches where they mispronounce names of important people or countries. They dropped their notes, they mangled their slides, they mispronounced things, and they drew attention to themselves as making mistakes. And the other half just did their amazing polished speech. And then they asked all the reporters after these speeches, like, who would you most like to get to know? Who would you like to hear again? Who was the most intelligent? Who had the best talks? Well, guess which group got rated as, I want to get to know you. I want to hear you again. You were the smartest and the best. Well, it was the group that flubbed up. Okay. And there's a very good reason for that is we all know we're human and each of us is aware of all our flaws and limitations. And it feels intimidating to be around someone who seems like they're all that. And in fact, if your hair isn't quite perfect, you're going to be more approachable. If your weight isn't perfect, if your kids aren't perfect, if your pet pees on the carpet, you're going to be easier for people to see you're a human being and you're approachable. And so the last thing I'm going to say here is lead with your vulnerability. So if you have anxiety, if you have depression, if you're feeling you're not quite enough, it's a sign that you're human and you're actually like the rest of us. And we know that the largest group of disorders is the anxiety disorders and then the mood disorders. So you guys are a large chunk of the population, and there are going to be other people that know exactly what you're going through if you let them in and let them know.
Yeah, we have just a few minutes left in this session. There are so many more things that we can talk about, but what I would love to have is kind of one takeaway from each of you on how can you prioritize your mental health during the season and how can you support someone who might be struggling during the season.
I would say that prioritizing your mental health means taking some time to slow down and think about what you want this next month to look like, what is going to be best for you. And then giving yourself permission to take baby steps towards that. A lot of times in my work with folks with social anxiety, we know that avoidance is like the heartbeat of anxiety. And so I'm constantly pushing people to, to face their fears and to do that in a slow way, but to ultimately try to confront any forms of avoidance. So for example, things like always taking a friend with you when you go to the gym, or leaving a gathering several times to make sure that you look perfect in the mirror, checking yourself in the mirror. And so those are avoidance behaviors that we're often trying to work towards eliminating. I do think, though, that the baby steps piece is important. So during the holidays, if you're going to a gathering and you're really nervous about running out of things to talk about or not being able to engage in conversation, I think that it is okay to go ahead and plan ahead and think about a few topics that you have a few topics ready that you can talk about with your family members. Ultimately, we're generally not encouraging things like scripting out what you're going to say beforehand, but I think it's okay to do what will help you in service of your bigger goals. Like if you really want to engage with your family and have that time, figure out how you can do that and make it so that it doesn't feel as anxiety provoking as it might otherwise. So that's what I would say for that in terms of prioritizing your mental health. Come up with what works for you and figure out what those baby steps or ways that you could prepare would look like. And then as far as supporting someone else who might be struggling, I think for one thing, validating other people's feelings can go a long way. So if you know that a friend is struggling with anxiety, saying something along the lines of, I know that you're struggling with anxiety and this time of year might be especially tough. And the key is though, to not then say, but going to this party really won't be that big of a deal. So you want to validate and kind of keep those but statements out of it. And then you could just ask people, I want to be a source of support for you. Tell me, what would work best? What would support look like for you? What would being a good friend in this situation, what would that look like in your world? What would work best for you? So acknowledging it.
I think those are great points. And I think maybe just to add to that, is knowing that you're not alone. So in having these symptoms of anxiety, depression, just sadness during this time, that it is quite common, as Karen mentioned, high rates of anxiety disorders. And it's okay. It is okay to not feel full of joy during this time for the whole season. And I think it'll be important to know what works for you, what doesn't work for you, right? And so, as Tanisha mentioned, what do you want this time to look like for yourself, right? What is it that you feel you need most? What is it that you know will be really tough for you? So maybe even just taking 5 or 10 minutes to write out, okay, these next 2 weeks, and what is it that I think will be helpful? What is it that I know I don't want to do this? And having a clear sense of how you're going to engage during this holiday season can be helpful to manage your symptoms. And the big thing too is, right, we have this tendency to avoid, especially things that make us feel uncomfortable, anxious. We're feeling kind of sad. We don't want to be around those people, in those situations, but knowing that it's helpful to push yourself and figure out what you're able to, you can deal with a lot more than what you think, right? And so figuring out ways to engage and not avoid everything, because we know avoidance, again, it can increase your anxiety, and not engaging activities can increase your depressive symptoms. And so do have some things in mind that you intend on engaging with, activities you would like to go to. So just planning it out. So in terms of managing those symptoms, the mental health symptoms, it's helpful to have a plan for how you're going to engage during this holiday season. And then I think, not to be repetitive, right, but as far as helping other people during this time, just ask what they need, and know that you can be that source of support. Be very clear in your your intentions to help. So given that this is such a busy time, I think a lot of people just think that we're all surrounded by friends and family, but some people don't have as much support, and our perceptions of that can impact our behavior in terms of how much we engage. So just checking in with that family member, checking in with a friend, even if it's someone who seems like they're happy and smiling all the time, just let them know, hey, I'm here for you. How can I help? Or letting them know, I'm thinking of you. That's it. Simple statement. But it is important we stay connected to everyone despite the presentation, because a lot of times those with mental health symptoms don't present in the way that you think that they will, right? Depression may not look like depression. Anxiety may look a little bit different. And so just extending a helping hand to those in your circle, I think, is really important to check in. So it's just adding on what Tanisha said. Really great points, though.
Yeah, I don't know that I could add anything more. I think the thing I'd want to remind everyone is, when we think of joy, what we actually mean is living on purpose and knowing that we have a bigger mission. And that mission may be that we want to be a kind person. We want to have a meaningful life. And joy doesn't mean happiness, which is, feeling good. It means that I am fulfilled because I'm moving forward. And what that means for someone with anxiety or depression is, part of your mission is to not let anxiety or depression make your choices, but to let your better self choose, and to realize you can work toward joy even when you're at your most pained and you're most struggling. And then the other thing is, I'm going to tell you something not to do. Okay. And that is, if you want to support someone who's struggling, don't give them any advice. And the thing most of us want to do when we're loving someone is to tell them how to do it better and to give them our best wisdom. And obviously the three of us are doing that right now, but we're hoping we have your permission. And so what I tell people is only give advice if you're paid for it or someone begs you for it. And it's much better to give compassion where you're just listening and reflecting and saying, I see you, I hear you, because I think that's our deepest need, is to be seen and heard as we are. So I'm going to tell you all, turn off your advice giving chunk of your brain and give that a rest, and it will go better for you all.
Right. I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you to our presenters for their endless wisdom. I think we are all a little bit more ready to go into a mentally healthy holiday season, and start getting those things off of our checklist. So thank you everyone for being here, and I wish you all a happy holiday. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Happy holiday.